Let's turn to our top story. United Nations weapons inspectors get to work today in Damascus on the site of last week's suspected chemical weapons attack that left more than 300 people dead. The team will comb the area for evidence of banned chemicals and, most importantly, to try to identify who is behind the artillery barrage and its cloud of toxic smoke. And what is the next response? Well, one has been the shipment of 20 trailers carrying weapons that has crossed the border from Turkey into Syria, destined for rebel fighters.
This Gulf-financed shipment is unusually large. It weighs 400 tons and is reported to be a direct response to the chemical attack in Damascus. I spoke to Bilal Saab, who is the director of the Institute of Near East and Gulf Military Analysis in Washington.
First of all, let's take a look at the nature of the shipment because it gives us a good indicator of the supplier's intentions. So basically, we're talking about ammunition here and lots of it, in addition to an unspecified but relatively small amount of light weapons. So excluded from this shipment are surface missiles and heavy anti-aircraft missiles. So in other words, there are no strategic weapons. Now, the rebels already possess some anti-aircraft weapons. Some of it is shoulder fire, and they may have received more anti-tank weapons. But long story short, this new inventory is not really likely to immediately tip the balance of power to the rebels' favor. The countries that may have been involved in supplying them are the usual suspects: Saudi Arabia, Qatar, perhaps even the Emirates.
Would the U.S. have known about it?
I think so. I think such a large shipment would not have been made possible without the coordination of the Americans, especially that it happened along the borders of Turkey, and Turkey is a NATO member. So I would suspect that the Americans knew about it.
So you say that these are mostly tactical weapons without much of an impact on the ongoing war.
No, let's make it very clear. It's very useful for ground operations, especially against tanks of the Syrian government forces. But I don't think that this is the kind of weaponry that would tip the balance of power, and I don't think that this is the kind of weapons that would be considered as strategic weapons.
What sort of weapons would have tilted the balance of power, so to speak?
I think it would be very useful for them to start receiving in larger quantities anti-aircraft weapons. They may have a few. We don't know who has them. Most likely it's jihadist elements that have them, not really the Free Syrian Army. So I would consider anti-aircraft weapons as more strategic weapons, perhaps even surface-to-surface missiles, but I don't think that the rebels have the capability to field and introduce surface-to-surface missiles.
And talking about the jihadist element of the opposition in Syria, what do you think has been done to make sure that the weapons that are being sent in at this point do not land in the wrong hands?
It's an excellent question. I don't think I have a good answer to that. The goal, obviously, is to minimize that risk as much as possible, try to control the flow of weapons. One of the ways you can do that is exactly what this shipment was designed to, just facilitate it through the border of Turkey. The Turkish border is by far the safest one if you compare it to the Jordanian one or the others. Other than that, I'm sure there are by now well-established channels of communication with the Free Syrian Army commanders. But to completely eliminate that risk is not realistic, simply because the Syrian battlefield is heavily infiltrated by jihadists. And there's always a possibility that in the future, the jihadists will be able to seize such weaponry from the Free Syrian Army itself. So there's going to be competition and perhaps even violence that is waged against the members of the Free Syrian Army by the jihadists. So that risk will always be there.
And that is Bilal Saab, who is the director of the Institute for Near East and Gulf Military Analysis in Washington.